So I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I've been around the solutions a while. I started working with back when it was called Windows Azure, before it was Microsoft Azure, back in 2014 when I was working for a partner. So I wanted to focus a little bit on a couple of things in this hybrid multi-cloud, not just from an infrastructure and management and governance standpoint, but also look at what are those things that we're doing and offering to promote remote work. Ron mentioned talking about, we would have to cancel this if it was in person, but, platforms like Teams and Zoom and other solutions allow us to do this and keep these things moving forward and have this interaction when otherwise it might not have happened. So I first want to start out talking about, environments are evolving. You've got thousands of apps. You've got diverse infrastructure from a hardware platform, from a, data center co-location, even hardware out of the edge. You've got, think more and more computing analytics are being done now out in the field and not back at the data center with just the data coming back. So there's a lot of changing in the infrastructure, and then obviously multi-cloud. I know, completely understand we are not the only public cloud. There's AWS, Google, Oracle, IBM. You also have private clouds out there. So how do you figure out the best way to wrap your arms around what's all out there and make sure you're keeping track of your environment, make sure you're managing your environment to the best of your ability, and make sure that you're ensuring it's safe, it's secure, and that it's going to maintain and provide for your business and keep your business moving forward. So with that, you look at, there are a lot of reasons that having a hybrid approach and having tools that support a hybrid approach for infrastructure, for applications, for data makes sense. Some places around the globe, some places even here in the US, is starting to crop up data sovereignty, making sure that they're in a specific place. If you need those edge workloads out in the field, you think of the energy industry, and I used to support oil and gas customers that were doing drilling out in the field. That's low latent network connectivity back. So they have to do some of those things out at the edge because they need it there to operate their business. Data center modernization, hardware has a life cycle. How do you modernize your data center? How do you keep track of that? Is there an opportunity to do something different? You need business continuity. You can't rely, and I will say on this, putting one resource in the cloud doesn't mean because it's in the cloud, it's resilient. You need to always think about business continuity, disaster recovery, because things can even happen to cloud providers. I know it's happened to us at Microsoft. I know it's happened at AWS. I know it's happened to Google. It just because you say it's in the cloud doesn't mean it's necessarily resilient. And then obviously we know companies don't want to be locked into one provider. We understand that you want to have a choice and we want to be able to support that choice, but we also understand it becomes cumbersome when you're trying to manage workloads across different environments, across different private and public cloud providers. So with that, 90% of enterprises are going to be depending on hybrid. I think that number's actually gone up. This might be an older slide. And even more than that, have a multi-cloud strategy, right? You don't have, I don't know or have had any one company yet that I've worked with that said, I'm having everything of mine is going in the cloud, right? Everything of mine, I don't have anything on-prem. You may have some startups doing that because they don't have to worry about the infrastructure costs. They don't have to worry about some of the on-prem costs, but it's evolved over time in what is happening and how businesses are taking advantage of new technology, taking advantages of economies of scale that private and public cloud providers can provide. And so that's where we see these numbers growing each and every year. So what we've come to realize and what we've developed through our Azure Arc solution is the ability to support customer hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, to support the management. We bring Azure services to any infrastructure. It doesn't matter if it's in AWS, if it's in GCP, if it's running on VMware in your private cloud or your data center. We can support the management, the governance, and some policies, and even security, bringing those Azure services down to where you need them. Support modernizing data centers. You think about, I'm blanking on the name of it, I'm sorry, but you think about hyperconverged infrastructure and how more and more companies and organizations are moving towards that with their hardware solutions in their data center. We now have the ability to bring Azure services through Stack HCI and deploy that as a hyperconverged infrastructure to manage on-prem. And then again, edge computing is more and more ubiquitous today. It's more and more widely used for a variety of reasons, both technically and for the business purposes. And so how do we then manage and monitor and defend and secure those that are out, those resources that are out in the field, sometimes that are very critical to infrastructure that have a large impact, not just on my organization, but on the nation. Think Colonial Pipeline and how some of those things happen when they had the cybersecurity attack on their operational infrastructure and what it meant to the Eastern Seaboard and the flow of oil and gas that supported a lot of people in those areas. So with Azure Arc, you take a look at these three things and you look at, okay, well, what does it provide, right? It provides a single control plane so that you have unified operations, unified management, unified governance within one window. Azure Arc, when you Arc enable and you provide and extend those services down, you are able to then manage. You're able to apply policies. You're able to govern and keep track from a service management perspective. You're able to understand what's running where so that you don't have services in one cloud where I've got to go to one portal to do this. You don't have another portal, I got to go do this. And in Azure, I got to do it here. And then on-prem, I got to do it in vCenter. No, you have one place where you can do that. And it saves a lot of time and management costs when you think about it. The next part is bringing services to any infrastructure. Now we can bring cloud native apps. When we talk about Azure Stack HCI for on-prem, when we talk about being able to enroll AWS and GCP services into Azure Arc, we can bring security. We can bring our Defender for cloud services, our Defender for SQL. We can bring those pieces so you have a unified security platform and you're not reliant on multiple platforms and having to manage the integration and the monitoring of all of those signals coming in. Again, in the data center Stack HCI gives you the ability to basically run Azure on-prem to an extent. Not all services are going to be available, but then you can manage and you can deploy and you can maintain those services all from within the Azure portal, even though you've got them running in your data center that are on the servers may be right next to you. And then finally, modernizing data centers. We know that you want to move forward. There's things like new data services. There's other pieces and things that are coming with our operating systems, with open source operating systems like Linux. You want to make sure you're bringing those to the forefront and allowing your developers, allowing your users, allowing the business to develop and grow and take advantage of those things to help make sure you're moving your company, your organization, your business forward and get the best return on investment and value you can out of your IT spend. So I'm going to go quickly through this because I do want to get to some of the remote work stuff. And I know that I've only got probably about 10 more minutes and leaving time for questions. But again, Azure Arc, any infrastructure, Arc-enabled servers, Arc-enabled SQL Server, Arc-enabled Kubernetes clusters. You need to develop or you need to deploy, we can enable it and we can manage it, monitor it, govern it, and secure it across all of those platforms, no matter where it is, on-prem, AWS, GCP, IBM, Oracle, Azure, right? It gives you the single place to go and manage. It reduces time, it reduces costs. It provides you better insight and security because now you're not having to worry about integrating and putting together multiple third-party solutions that allow you to keep track of what's out there, what needs to be addressed, are there any threats, are there any issues, and hey, do I need anything I need to upgrade? So it helps from that standpoint. It keeps you secure, keeps you modern. Next part of it is building apps anywhere, right? And we're going to hear, I think the next presentation with Jerome on GitHub. Later we'll hear a little bit about ChatGPT and some of the AI services. Bringing those services through Azure Arc. Kubernetes is a big thing, container development on containers and developing in containers. Being able to manage those through Azure Arc, regardless of where Kubernetes containers are sitting, whether they're sitting in Azure on-prem. Making sure that you have those containers secured, providing the familiar tools you may already be working with if you're doing the right development and say it's .NET or C# or whatever that is, but being able to bring those familiar in those same development practices and development technologies that you're already using to the services regardless of where they are. And then being able to automate security, automate performance, automate all of the things that you need to ensure that where you're developing and that your development and deployments are secure and are not opening up threats or threat vectors to bad actors that could potentially have some serious ramifications for your organization. Modernized data estate. I think right now, and you see this with the kind of, I don't want to say it's an AI revolution, but everything that's going on and all the questions and all of the hype around AI across the board, not just with us, but you hear from Google, you hear from IBM and others. What more and more customers are looking to do more with the data and the information that they have, right? So with Azure, modernizing Azure Data Services, doing it and making sure that's enabled through Azure Arc allows you to keep those more modern and most current services at the forefront so that you're not worrying about, am I on an unsupported platform? Can I scale to the best that I need as my data grows? I mean, that's the biggest piece of this today is data growth within an organization. How am I managing it? We have other services under the covers like Purview that help you manage and monitor and govern so that pertinent and relevant and regulated information is maintained and you have a chain of custody. You have all those things in place that can track how that data was entered, how that data was managed, how it was manipulated, how it was deleted, so that you can comply with the rules and regulations that your organization needs to adhere to. And even at that, disconnect support. You mentioned field services, right? Or edge computing. How can I put those analytical services, those data services that I need out in the field? How can I manage it? How can I support it? And how can I make sure that I'm allowing for the right level of analytics and data manipulation that I need to keep my operations running where it needs to be running? And then Azure Stack, there's Azure Stack HCI. That's the hyper-converged infrastructure solution that we have that runs either on hardware that we have predefined, or it can run on third-party hardware. Dell, Cisco, Lenovo, I think, are just three of them. And there are some other things. We have Azure Stack Hub, Azure Stack Edge, where it is for those more field-ready use cases where you do need to bring Azure services down in the field. You do need to have the ability to manage and monitor VMs from the Azure portal, even though they're sitting out in the middle of nowhere connected with a T1 or satellite link back to your organization or to your data center. It gives you the pre-built integration so that it just connects up, it automatically pops up in your windows, and away you go. There's not that additional third-party integration or pay for an additional third-party solution to integrate those field use cases and those field deployments back into your primary data or primary estate back at a data center or a colo or in a cloud somewhere. So those are all what we're doing from a hybrid infrastructure data application management support kind of on the back end. I want to switch a little bit now as I move forward and talk to how are we enabling hybrid work? I mean, you think going back to beginning of 2020 and the start of the pandemic, it shifted everything and how we get to remote work and how we think about working. It's expected now, I think, across the board in most instances that there is going to be some level of ability to work remotely. And so solutions like Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, which built under the covers is basically on Azure services, but it's being able to meet the user with their desktop wherever they need it, whenever they need it. There's differences in between them. I'll go over it in a second, but it's all built on top of Windows 11, which, if you remember, was deployed or was announced and released during the heart of the pandemic in June of 2020. 2021. I might be getting my years mixed up, but it was built for hybrid work, right? So now you have the ability to run Windows 10 and Windows 11 workstations, or desktops wherever you need to, right? And the operating system itself is built so that it's optimized in those scenarios. You think of the things that virtualization and virtual desktops unlock for your work scenarios for your organization. Data security, you think about it, you don't have endpoints out there where you have to worry about managing admin rights on those endpoints. You don't have to worry about what can they plug into that endpoint and then how do they get back to it. Monitoring and managing VPN solutions that you have to enable or maybe not enable. If I need high capacity computing for a short period of time, right, I'm doing very intense image processing, or I've got something where I've got an intense workload or application like an AutoCAD or an Esri ArcGIS that requires those intense solutions, but I don't use it for maybe 10% of the time. Am I going to go out and buy a very expensive device that I need to give my user, or can I just present them a desktop that they need for the time that they need to work with it? And I save costs and money in that standpoint, and I can standardize more of my endpoints across the board. More and more bring your own devices. Disaster recovery, specifically from an endpoint, that data goes down or that device goes down. How do you recover from it if it has a hardware failure? Temporary workforces. I've got, summer interns that come in. Am I really going to give them a PC, or I'm going to say, hey, do you have a laptop? Great. Here's a virtual desktop that you can go use. And then last one, I actually am dealing this a lot with one of my customers now, is mergers and acquisitions. How do we set up those companies that are being merged or acquired so that they have a common space to work in without having to go and invest in hardware that is going to persist past the acquisition and once they get standardized on those things, it's something that can be spun up and then shut down once the acquisition is closed and all of the IT services have been integrated and you have the right management. So the two solutions we have, Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, do support those. They're both supporting Windows 10, Windows 11. They're both available for business and enterprises. You got to think from a Windows 365 perspective, it's more along the Microsoft 365 where it's just presented through that portal. It's there, it's less touch. Azure Virtual Desktop, as the name you might think, is built through the Azure portal. Underlying services are all Azure, but you're actually managing and maintaining those AVD services in Azure. Windows 365 is more of a SaaS, software as a service, where AVD is more PaaS, platform as a service. You have much greater control on Azure Virtual Desktop than you have Windows 365. But if you have an IT staff that is maybe not as robust or doesn't have the time to manage, but this is a need from a security or for some other reason, from a hybrid remote reason, Windows 365 gives you that lighter touch, easier to manage environment. Like I said, either way, it supports Windows 10, Windows 11. AVD will support some of those more intense CPU or graphical use cases that you have, depending on the application. But it allows your organization to meet the user where they're at with the solution that they need, wherever they need it, whenever they need it, in a secure and safe fashion.
Hey, Jeremy?
Yes, sir.
One question that Andrew just asked, and that relates to multimedia-centric applications, video-centric applications like Teams. Which of those two solutions do you recommend can work effectively and deal with issues like latency and performance?
Both solutions, and that's a great question. Both solutions are optimized for Teams because obviously they sit in our environment. They have optimizations with Teams deployed in either Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365 that support that, because under the covers, all you're doing at that point from a Teams perspective, and I'm going to get into Teams here in a second, is you're streaming the video and you're streaming your audio back and forth. But all the underlying connections from a telephony perspective, from actually communicating back to the service, when it's sitting Windows 365 or AVD, it's actually then using our internal dark fiber to then go communicate with where those services live based on where your organization sits and where your services are deployed within our cloud. So both are optimized. I've used both internally in Microsoft Teams on a Windows 365 PC along with an AVD. And as long as your internet connection is fine, or it doesn't even have to be super strong, you don't really notice a difference than running Teams on your endpoint sitting on your desk.
Thanks, Jeremy. We had one other question too from Patrick, and he talked about if you're going to adopt BYOD with the Azure Virtual Desktop, are there any security risk, or how can you ensure compliance when the device is out of your control?
There are things that you can do, and a great question, because I've also had these questions come up when I've talked with some of my customers. There are some things you can do and force at the device level using things like Intune or endpoint management. But for the most part, you've got to think that the abstract layer, as long as they're coming in through that remote desktop session, as long as they're coming in through either the remote desktop client, if they're using the web client, whatever it is, it's abstracted away from that. So you're not, and there are ways you can protect the things like being able to connect USB ports, connect printers, connect local devices and local resources at the endpoint to those virtual desktops, whether it's Windows 365 or it's AVD. So there's controls that you have to make sure that those things, if there is a compromise on the endpoint, they cannot reach back into that virtual desktop. And then there are ways that from the client side, you can force to make sure that that client is continuously updated by the application level, because those users are going to be signing in with company credentials where you can then manage it on an application basis. I know I've only got one more minute, so I'm going to just quickly fly through, and I think some of this
We've got a couple more minutes. It's fine,
okay.
Jeremy. This is good content.
All right. So I'm almost done. I just want to talk Teams really quick. Obviously, hybrid work, Teams is at the center of everything, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's asynchronous, synchronous, whatever it is. Today I've been back and forth at different times, missing people on Teams chats, whatever. I've had video calls, I've had meetings. Teams is the platform, obviously, we put out there that supports how you want to work, how you want to interact, and at the time and place you want to interact. I have team members who are in calls and involved all day, so they can't get to Teams chats, but it allows them to then provide that information later on when they have the availability to respond and give the information so that it's ready for me or for someone else to pick up when we come back in and come back online. There's been I've heard some concerns. It's like, you put something like Teams out there, are you always available? And it's one of those things where, yes, it does make you always available, but it's also, you can set your own boundaries. There's things in Teams like quiet hours, want to protect family time, but you don't, may want to get on later. But it's giving the freedom and the ability to work, to allow users to work how they need to, when they need to, and in the form that they need to. And so you think of Teams, it supports meetings, chat, call, collaboration, automation, small team collaboration, large team collaboration, live events. There's a whole lot of things that it can do. It's not just for information workers, it's also for frontline workers. And I use it all the time to interact with my customers and have external partners message me. And so that if I need to hop on or I need a quick update on something, I can just send them a quick Teams chat and they usually get back to me. And it's a lot easier than trying to pick up the phone and call them. They don't see a text. And I mean, email nowadays, it's more likely that something's going to get buried. Whereas on Teams, it pops up, you see it. If it's a quick response, they'll get it, and you usually get it pretty fast. And just, over the last year, 300 plus features, and they're still bringing more, one of which I want to talk through here in a second, but I don't want to steal too much thunder from Arun later because he's going to go through the chat GPT. But I do want to talk about this idea of Copilot. And I've got Microsoft 365 Copilot up here because we're talking about hybrid work, but we really do have a Copilot across all of our platforms now. We have a Copilot when it comes to security. We have a Copilot when it comes to sales and dynamics. But from a remote work and from a work enablement standpoint, Microsoft 365 Copilot is the ability for us to bring AI closer to the user in the environment that they're working in the applications that they're working in Office, and in the endpoint they're working in Windows. And if any of you attended Build, and I would highly recommend going back to review some of those sessions from our Build events last month. There are a lot of features coming with Copilot and being able to leverage AI to automate and do things that typically you had to sit down and take time to do, whether it was a few minutes or a few hours. It's taking large language models, it's taking that ChatGPT, the Azure OpenAI services, it's then leveraging the data that we already have within the Microsoft Graph, and it's applying it inside of those Microsoft 365 applications. So you think, hey, I've got these notes from this meeting that I had the other day. I want to summarize and I want to get a memo out about it. Hey, ChatGPT in Word, please take these notes in this OneNote document, drop it into Word so I can send it out or share it out via OneDrive. Hey, in Excel, my Copilot, Excel Copilot, can you go in, drill down on this data and tell me what this means? And okay, I've got a question on this. PowerPoint, I need you to pull in these pictures for me and build a presentation around X. Outlook, tell me my important emails that I missed. In Teams, what did I miss in this meeting? What was transcribed? Tell me the important points about that. I mean, think about the time that it saves just being able to do that. Now, again, it is also what you make of it. And there's a lot of concern around it, but I think building on the principles, and I think hopefully Arun will talk about it, responsible AI and the things we're integrating, we're making it available so it can meet you and meet the users where you need to be and how you want to enable it to best maximize your efficiency, best maximize your work in a hybrid environment. So I don't want to get more into the Copilot, but there's a whole lot of content out there, especially that we had at Build. I would highly recommend anyone going back to look at those, to review those videos if they have any more questions.